And Bawku has been boiling since this year began. Almost always, it always appears that in the turn of the new year, something happens in Bawku. We've seen that again this year, except that this year's eruption in violence in Bawku has been one that is pretty much unprecedented in many, many aspects. Also because of the challenges that we see in the sub-region with the terrorist activity. And I guess that is what is making the latest conflict and disturbance in Bawku even more problematic, right? And we've seen already, this year, we've heard about some things that has never happened before in this age-old Bawku conflict. The use of improvised explosive devices in Bawku. The defense minister himself made the point that for the first time in this age-old conflict, I'll track back for you how long this has been going on. But for the first time in this age-old conflict, we are seeing the use of improvised explosive devices in Bawku, an attempt to blow up a bridge that the military uses for supply purposes and the equipment as well, because that was targeted. And then, of course, there's a fear that because of this, how it borders with the Burkina Faso, and we know what the situation in Burkina Faso is with the security, there is a fear that terrorists may take advantage of what is happening in Bawku. And that's why the Bawku issue, more than ever before, it's such an important subject that we need to deal with, right? And that's why tonight we are asking this fundamental question. Is the renewed violence a threat to us? Or many of us in Accra have felt very comfortable because we believe we are so far away from the conflict that is happening in Bawku. But trust me, you are not. Because, again, I'll illustrate for you as we go on in this conflict. We sit in Accra and we talk about what has been happening there for a while, right? We're now seeing this an attempt to blow up this major bridge with an improvised explosive device. And then we are also seeing the number of deaths going up. This year alone, 10 killings reported alone as far as this is concerned. And if you look at WANEB is giving us a sense that 23 at least, 10 more killings confirmed in 2020, 23 in all. That's quite a significant, staggering number to think about. And then you look at the breakdown. You put we've talked about these are numbers, right? But they are real human beings, faces behind it. And one of the things I want to stress, all these are the specific cases, but there are innocent bystanders, children caught up in this conflict that is happening in Bawku who are actually also dying as a result of this. A child of about 12 years old was also reportedly killed on Friday, February 10. That child, what has he got to do with this conflict, right? The 12-year-old child was was killed as well. And then we've heard the story about pregnant women also caught up in this as well. So yes, it may be far away from you geographically, but the evidence shows that it's trickling a bit downward to the south because the representatives, there's a report in Ashaiman, for example, where the tensions in Bawku is beginning to reflect in some of the activities that the residents in Ashaiman here in Greater Accra region are beginning to exhibit. They're beginning to take the fight, amongst the communities of the Kusasis and Mampusis in Ashaiman. So that is why this is an essential matter. And then to complicate it, there was this very controversial enskillment, right, of a disputed chief. The government says we simply do not recognize this particular chief who have been appointed. So the government directs that this individual who has been enskinned should be arrested because it's disputed. The securities agencies were asked to effect that arrest. And then we saw the procurement of this warrant that was procured, right? The military then attempts on the back of the warrant to effect the arrest. They actually went into the palace of this enskinned chief. And the interesting thing about this is this whole incident was actually not happening even in Bawku. And that's the thing I'm trying to stress here. In the Upper East region. It was happening in the Northeast region, in a completely different geographic location. Because that's where the king was installed. And when the military guys went in there, the youth fought back. They fought back. The next day, they blocked roads. So pay attention to what happens. Yesterday, the whole of yesterday. They blocked the roads leading to Bogatanga and a highway. And from the reports that we got from our reporters on the ground, it led to a situation where those who experienced it, those traveling to Boga on that stretch, were left in traffic that they said they haven't seen before, even in cities like Accra, right? So you think you're in Accra, this is far away from you because of that conflict that has moved now from the upper east region, Bawku to be very precise, very close to the Burkina Faso border. It's come all the way down to the northeast region, to the side, to the point now where they're blocking highways and leading to traffic. Extreme gridlock yesterday that lasted for hours. It took the intervention of the police, and the police could not help. The military could not help as well. They have to find some of the factions to come in and talk to the people before the roads were cleared. And that is why we're having this conversation tonight. We're trying to look at the big picture here. So we'll talk to our guest on this matter. The implications has been dire, right? At least 113 people have died since 2001. If that is not staggering, I don't know what is. 113 people have died since 2001. Before this year, before this latest eruption, it became almost like a forgotten conflict. But as we begin to see, it is escalating in more dangerous ways than we can imagine. This is a bit of the history here of this. Going back all the way to just around independence, 1957, right? When it erupted, the chieftaincy conflict between the Mamprosis and the Kusasis have actually exchanged hands on 3 occasions, right? At least change occurred in 1983. This is 40 years ago when the government decided to recognize the Kusasi chief instead of the Mamprosi chief. That obviously began a setting relationship there that then strained the relations and led to tensions. The following year saw a handful of violent altercations as well. And then in 1986, peace returned. The chieftaincy dispute fell into this realm of politics and court battles. And I must stress, the politics of it has been at the heart of this as well. Kusasis, Mamprosis, both of them identifying with various political parties in this country, and which is really at the heart of this, right? And then we've seen the court battles, or the legal, the legal architecture will have to come to play if somebody goes to court, which is really what the military guys attempted to effect on the back of the court order. So that has been the brief history. But as I've been stressing, this is no longer a situation that Bawku has to deal with alone. Because if you look at the Google map that I just want to illustrate for you, this, by the way, is the Bawku enclave. But you see how sparsely populated Bawku is. The entire place, though, if you just stray slightly to the north, is the entire place of Burkina Faso, right? So it is very porous. Anybody can come in at any time if they really mean to, from the Burkina Faso area there. And that makes it even more complex to deal with it. Let's look at the terrain we are dealing with here. This is the Bawku municipality in the center here. All this area is bare land, and this is Bawku, to be very specific. All this area is bare land, and you're talking about Burkina Faso just bordering it there. And so you have a situation where, as the president expressed a couple of days ago, that the concern is the terrorists that have been operating in Burkina Faso. And there's been the latest, recently, a few days ago, there was an attack along the border, but in the Burkina Faso territory, just around these areas here, right, where many Burkinabe security forces were actually killed, right? And it's so easy for these individuals to just cross in from the side of the map I showed you, because it's Burkina Faso, into the Bawku area, and just take advantage of the insecurity situation there and then foment trouble, right? So this tells you a story, and it possibly a reason why the security agencies are struggling to get a handle of this. When I return from the break, I will speak to my guests who are joining me here for a conversation about this very important subject. Are we all at risk? And if we come to that conclusion that we are, then should we, at this country, should we be adopting a national approach to dealing with the Bawku crisis? It's not that we've left it to the part of the region to, but should we be adopting a national approach? Should we declare Bawku as a national emergency, for example? That then channels a lot of more resources to the place to deal with. Because if we don't do so, as I've illustrated here, the terrorists will take hold and they may use Bawku as a staging post for other parts of the country. Stay with me after the break. We'll deal with that. Emmanuel Bombande is a conflict resolution, peace building, and development professional. Joins us on Zoom. Also joining us is Albert Yaoyang. He's a national network coordinator of the West Africa Network for Peace Building, WANEP. And I'm delighted to say that a former deputy minister for the Interior and ranking member on the Defense and Interior Committee, James Agaga, joins us also via Zoom. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time here on PM Express. Mr. Bombande, I want to start with you. I guess let's start with I guess one of the most thorny issues that seem to have placed us on the brink in Bawku. The attempt by the military to arrest this skinned chief is disputed skinned chief recently. I wonder, yesterday I was just recounting the youth reacted by blocking roads leading to Bogatanga. It left many people stranded in traffic. Was that attempt by the military one that, in the context of the conflict, was in furtherance of peace? Was it a smart security move?
Good evening, Evans, and good evening to all your viewers. First of all, I think it's important to take a 30-second or 1 minute step back and to appreciate that narrative is very important. And a lot of the background you gave absolutely point on, except that the Bawku skin in terms of the problem of chieftaincy did not change in 1983. It changed in 1966. But if you were to take one step before 1966, the basis upon which Naba Abubrago I, the father of the current Bawku Naba, was installed as chief was as a result of the outcome of the Lord Lustwell Commission of Inquiry that had a comprehensive study of the Bawku skin affairs, which is a voluminous document that I recommend for everybody to read, and on the basis of which a determination was made about who should be the paramount chief of Bawku. But NLC Decree 112 in 1966 reversed that decision. And that's why I describe it as the first change. Okay. And you are right, in 1983, we had PNDC Law 75 reversing the NLC Decree of 1966. And subsequently, we will see the recurrence of violence. If I were to put my finger on your question, the way I want to respond to it is this. Evans, we are literally at the brink of the same scenario in Yendi of 2002, in which people like yourself in the media, those of us active in peace-building practice, were talking about the early warning and the capacity of the state to assert itself firmly in the protection of civilians, enforcement of the law, and providing the space for anybody who has any grievances related to chieftaincy to use the pathway that is legally the way to go about it. And the pathway to any chieftaincy situation or dispute in Ghana is the Regional House of Chiefs, the National House of Chiefs, and the Supreme Court. Because of the ambivalence in asserting its presence, we all saw what happened in March 2002 in Yendi. It took us 20 years to try to repair that damage. So we go back to your question, and you have given us a beautiful narrative beyond even our borders. And what we need to take into account is, how does the authority of the state affirm itself on the ground in a way that enforces the law but takes into account the emotional impact in which people want to go to pre-colonial days to legitimize what they are doing. And so it is not just a military operation, but it's a military operation that has to take into account a narrative that has a very sensitive and emotional impact. And this is where then it becomes tricky. If you don't have the presence of the state, then you create what is happening in the Sahelian countries, in what we call the ungoverned spaces. Because those spaces are ungoverned, and the state has not been able to enforce the rule of law, it was run over by terrorist groups. So the state must be present and to enforce itself. And that's why, and you are a good witness of that, we argue that we now need a different channel that promotes dialogue. And that is the genesis of the creation of the National Peace Council. So that the role of state security must always be present. Then you can have other channels, including our traditional institutions, to constantly be promoting dialogue. And the two fit together. So that everybody's narrative can have a channel of a peaceful resolution of violence and conflict, rather than unilateral activities, declarations, behavior, and actions that then threaten the security of the state. And Evans, I will conclude by saying, we keep on talking about the state. People confuse the state with the government. They forget that this government inherited from another government, and that government inherited from another government. Each of these governments have a responsibility to ensure that the state has the responsibility to protect its citizens, and that the rights of all of us, when we all feel protected, we then can be assured, whether you are Mamprusi or Kusasi in the context of Bawku, that your rights are also protected. And so those who might have a problem with the state in its function and roles should not forget that if the state is not firmly on the ground, they too will be vulnerable. Maybe not today, but tomorrow.
I mean, let me bring in Mr. Young. You've just laid the foundation there for this conversation. And do we have Mr. Yang on? Okay, I'll return to him because I understand that he may have a challenge with his audio. Mr. Yang, if you can hear me, just okay, great. Let's try and fix that. Mr. Agaga, you are on the Defense and Interior Committee. I mean, as of tonight, on that attempt by the military to arrest the disputed and skinned chief, and I know a few of the MPs in Parliament from that part of the country had held the press conference and also condemned that enskinment. Now, there was a court order, a warrant for the arrest. I see tonight that there's a second court order that has now also been signed that I want to read. It says, it is hereby ordered that the warrant of arrest issued for the arrest of Na Buhagu Muhammad Abdullah Shiriga, the paramount chief of Bankugu traditional area, and his kingmakers, is hereby rescinded under the inherent jurisdiction of the High Court. So there's a rescission of that particular order. First of all, give me your assessment of that initial move by the military on the back of that first order, the warrant to arrest, and now this latest one coming this evening that rescinds that order to arrest.
Well, Evans, first of all, I'd like to say that even before the rescission of the earlier order by the Bolgatanga High Court, I heard or listened to a tape which has gone viral, and in that tape you hear the Minister for Defense engage somebody who is supposed to be a party functionary in Wali Wali or Nalirugu. I mean, in a conversation about the stance of government so far as the warrant for the arrest of the Nairi and one other person who presented himself to be skinned as chief of Bawku, as completely untenable. And this was coming from the Minister for Defense. I don't know whether you have listened to the
No, I haven't listened to it at all.
Now, Evans, Listening to the minister in that audio, the impression I got was that government was a little bit confused about how to proceed in the face of the eskinnment that took place in Wali Wali. First of all, they failed to anticipate the very dire security consequences, right, that was bound to arise in the face of any attempt to arrest the Nairi. And the his name is his key name is now Kuluga II in Nalirugu. I thought that as you know, the managers of the country security, they ought to have anticipated that an attempt to arrest the two in Nalirugu would create very serious problems for them. And so that is the first point. My worry is that I don't know what intelligence they got from the Nalirugu and even in the northeast region, because I have somebody who gave me first-hand accounts of what happened when the person tried to ply the highway between Bolga to Tamale. And he tells me the scenes were very nasty and something very terrible could have happened. I don't want to mention names, but this informant tells me that when the youth of the area mounted road blockade and intercepted him, some initially thought he was some other person.
Yeah.
But when they realized that he wasn't the person they were looking for, they told him in the face that he was very lucky. I am just wondering what would have happened if the youth had managed to intercept the very person they said they were looking for. And so I think that next time we need to be guided. Some of these decisions we take must be informed by the intelligence we gather from the ground before we make such a move. But Evans, having said that, I've listened to my elder brother, Dr. Bombande. He's giving you a historical context to the Bawku crisis, so I don't intend to repeat that. But some of the issues he has raised, for me, has to do with creating avenues for dialogue beyond the use of military power or force to try to resolve the conflict. It is good that the state has deployed the security apparatus, the military is there. Somebody can say it's unfortunate because not too long ago, some brutalities were recorded in the area. But beyond that, you need their presence. But having them, the military and the police deployed in Bawku in itself is not a solution to the problem. The avenue for dialogue which used to be in place, the Inter-Ethnic Peace Committee, unfortunately has collapsed. What do we do following the collapse of that particular committee? I think we could draw useful lessons from the example of Yendi. And let me place on record that Yendi, in the case of Yendi, the courts have equally dealt with Yendi. There's even a reported decision in Yendi's Skin Affairs, Abdullah versus Andani. But the state just didn't fold this. When there were some security breaches in the area, and which resulted in the unfortunate death of the Yana, I think a committee was put in place, the committee of eminent chiefs. When the state put in place that particular committee, there were so many doubting Thomases. But in the final analysis, the committee was the one that aided in finding a lasting solution to the Dagbang crisis. I think we've gotten to the point where we should be drawing useful lessons from, how we handle the Yendi crisis.
Yeah, I mean, and I've heard people suggest that before. And I want to bring in Mr. Bombande. Mr. Yoyan will join us pretty shortly. Mr. Bombande, so I was making the point that Yendi was volatile. But Bawku presents a very unique challenge, also because of its geographic location, closer to the border with Burkina Faso, with all the challenge that Burkina Faso is dealing with, the terrorist threat that we know is very real in that part of the country. Now the use of improvised explosive devices, the defense minister himself told us that recently. And now we've seen that even this in Skiman didn't happen in Bawku, it happened in a different part of the country. Yesterday we had reports that in Ashaiman and in Accra, the two groups, had led to a fight that turned bloody. To what extent are we all at risk because of what is happening in Bawku?
Yes, Evans. So first of all, if we listen attentively to my good brother, Honorable Agalga, one thing we cannot afford to do is to be ambivalent, is to be unsure, and it is to be in the theater of operationalizing the protection of civilians through the security agencies in a way that is confused in the interpretations of political interference from whatever angle. And we cannot allow that to happen. Ghana has suffered from that consistently. And that is why the professionalization or the professional conduct of the security agencies becomes very important in terms of the command structure that then relates to the political directives of political actors, which then would link to the question that you raised, or the point that you are inviting me to respond to. Why is the northeastern corridor of Ghana, as you describe it, so vulnerable? It's because it is located in a neighborhood where communities have been overrun already by terrorist groups. Now, if you ask the question, how come that these neighboring countries are suffering the consequences of such high level of volatility? It is simply because of the inadequacy of the presence of the state in ensuring that laws are enforced, the rights of people are protected, and that there is safety and security. And so terrorists infiltrated and offered better alternatives to the communities as a way of recruiting young people by simply arguing that, where is the state to guarantee your protection? We will offer you protection, except that when they are recruited now to bring mayhem even into their own communities. If you take that analysis and put it in the context of Bawku, if our security agencies are not able to bring the professionalism that is required by the state to protect all citizens in a way that makes the respect for the rule of law, the enforcement of the law, to be the order of the day, we create the avenue for the recruitment of youth. Now, for people who might be listening, they will say, but is this not exaggerated? It is not exaggerated because in your description of what happened yesterday on the Tamale-Bolgatanga highway, a lot of the young people are already extremists in terms of their emotional imbalance. All it requires is for somebody to be convincing enough for some of these young people to fall into the trap of these groups. What else do you want? Because it's an ECOWAS highway, it's a major Ghanaian road, and it has been blocked for several hours. And what motivated, what inspired those young people to do what they were doing? They were no longer rational in their logic and in their reasoning. And that then can spread around in this part of the country. And so I want us to situate it and link it to your question and to say that, yes, the vulnerability is there for the potential of recruiting. But all that can only happen when the state is seen to be weak, with the suffering of indecision influenced by political interpretations that departs from the pathway to solving problems in a way that is peaceful. Now, from December 2021 and going into 2022, with all the recurrent violence, the state has been ambivalent until it is now hitting us with the inconsequential, illegal enskinment of a chief that now spontaneously puts the state authority into a mode of panic to try to deal with it. And when you find yourself in that situation, you are bound to make mistakes. And those are the mistakes Honorable Agalga was referring to. So there has to be a strategic security approach and response based on the prevailing laws of Ghana that must be respected. And finally, everybody has a narrative. Evans, in your village, in your community, your people have a narrative. There's no part of Ghana where there's no narrative. The problem occurs when you take your narrative unilaterally and insist that that's the only narrative and that's the only one people must take and believe in. Everybody's narrative must be subjected to the type of dialogue that is meaningful in a democratic state and not violating the law simply because you have a narrative.
Let me bring in Mr. Yoyang. Mr. Yoyang, with OneUp, you have recently done a very extensive study and have cataloged the challenge with the deaths and the devastation caused by this. So help us understand. This erupted this year. I mean, the latest eruption was this year. Before this year, I wonder, what has been the effort, the state effort, if you may, at trying to deal with the problem? Has it been led by dialogue, or has it been a military security solution? What did you find has been the approach so far in trying to deal with the Bawku situation?
As Honorable Bombande indicated, right from the beginning.
Oh, goodness me, we're having a challenge with this line. Hello, Mr. Yoyang.
The states adopted multiple approaches. Can you hear me, Evans?
Yes, I can hear you loudly and clear now. Hopefully it stays stable.
Hello?
Mr. Yoyang?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can now, yes. Please proceed. Okay, unfortunately, we have...
Yes, so...
yeah, please proceed. Please proceed.
Yes, that the state has adopted multiple approaches. They try to engage at a high level. If you would recall, the Nigeria apparently was invited by the president. Also, the chief in Bawku was also invited, and the conversations. Now, some directives were issued, and there were some resentment to those directives. Now, the state has also deployed security on the ground. And if you would do the observation, there has been heavy security presence in Bawku and the environment, and especially along the borders with Burkina Faso. Intelligence has been deployed, and several logistics have been supplied to the security to help tame the fight, as far as Bawku is concerned. But as Honorable indicated, there seems to be that challenge, with command and control and coordination of all the efforts. The National Peace Council, together with other civil society organizations, in fact, at some points, the Peace Council has done it alone, and at other times, it has partnered civil society to engage in some conversations with the various factions. But the command and control seems to be challenged. And to the extent that a number of criminal activities have taken place in Bawku, no one probably has known much about what has happened with those incidences. Several of them, multiple of them are involved, and we are not seeing any headway with those prosecution of those who have been involved. In fact, it's almost like a stalemate, and the court in Bolgatanga, doesn't seem to work. And if you have a situation where people in broad daylight openly committed offenses, as you would say, and there is no prosecution to date, we must begin to look at criminality as it should be, and probably to devolve that from the conflict in Bawku. And if somebody is seen to be offending the law and not in conformity with the rule of law, then that person needs to be brought to book. That can serve as deterrent. There have been attacks by marksmen, in some markets. No one knows much about the outcome of those incidences. And so it is very important that we need to look at that structure and combine multiple approaches, coordinated ones, that can then enable the conversations to go on and can soft ground, and also making sure that there's a clear distinction between criminal acts and then processes that are also seen to be lawful. If what we have heard yesterday, that, and of course we understand the transcendence of conflict, that something happened in Bawku, something happened in Naleru, and then we have some serious reactions on the road. That is a trans-ECOWAS highway. Burkina Faso is using, Mali is using, Niger is using, several countries are using the road. And then it was blocked for several hours, heavy traffic. That seems not to be in conformity with the rule of law. And that is where we need to begin to have some conversations with all the stakeholders involved as far as the Bawku conflict is concerned. The youth, who probably sometimes, as though there is nothing to do with themselves, engage in some of these. If we don't find a way out to having conversations with them, adopting multiple approaches, kinetic and non-kinetic approaches to addressing the issues, then we will always have a situation where it becomes very difficult for us to contain.
I've heard that suggestion that, deal with the criminal aspects of this. And if you adopt that approach, then you have to be arresting people and prosecuting them. And then you add to that, in the multiple approach also, you have dialogue where we can. But from everything that is happening, it doesn't appear to me that the factions involved in this are prepared for a dialogue here. And then also, it doesn't appear to me that the situation lends itself to law enforcement. Because yesterday, even the police vehicle, we understand, that approached the barriers that were erected illegally by the youth who were burning tires, had to, at the point, return the police vehicle with policemen. So that tells you the story that this is a complete breakdown of law and order. The police cannot get involved in this matter. I mean, so if that is the challenge that we are facing, how else do you deal with it? When you know criminality has happened, if you block a road, it's criminal. You're breaking the law. But the police can't effect an arrest, because if you effect an arrest, that will be an escalation of violence. That is the conundrum the state is facing in trying to deal with this problem.
I think that there are a number of things that we should not have allowed, and so to get into the state that we have gotten to. Let me say, first of all, Bawku, as we know, and the situation, any movement of people out of Bawku, there should be, some questions. There should be investigation, there should be monitoring. Any movement, and if you understand the relationship, also into Naleru, what is the intelligence doing in the Northeast region? What is the intelligence doing in the Upper East region in Bawku? That we, first of all, allowed this to happen. And then we are, as Emmanuel Bombande indicated, we are now caught up, where there are reactions. Now, there are criminal activities, obviously, that have taken place in Bawku. And as I indicated, there is a litany of them that have been, that are at court. We have not seen any prosecution. And in fact, that is where sometimes it's a bit interesting that after the incident in Naleru, we are seeing a warrant being issued, and it presupposes that we indeed have staff, in the High Court in Bolgatanga. So we need to look at that, and even the conversation in terms of dialogue, engagement with the stakeholders, that awareness needs to be brought to the various factions. That yes, we know you have an issue, but then some of your people are engaged in criminalities, and indeed, all of the people who have engaged in some acts, synonymous with criminal acts, might not also be related to the factions. Of course, the factions seems to take stance based on the outcome of the various processes they themselves have engaged in, and we also need to have conversation, despite the fact that, some have taken stance. Now, if you look at what happened in 2016, as far as our elections are concerned, you look at what happened in 2020, people were not satisfied with the outcomes of the processes. But that was the ruling, and they had to. There have been several instances.
I may have lost him there. Let me quickly bring in the ranking on the Defense Interior Committee, James Akaga. Mr. Akaga, you had hinted that we should draw lessons from the way we dealt with the Yendi crisis. And there we set up, a panel of chiefs led by the Otumfuo Setutu II, who led this and eventually brought peace. Will that necessarily work in the Bawku scenario? Is that
in this country?
Should we replicate that same approach in Bawku, or do you recommend a different approach and a different national approach to the Bawku crisis? What's your specific recommendation?
Well, my recommendation, Evans, is very clear, and I am minded by the fact that in both Bawku and Yendi, allusions have been made to court judgments, and that is why I specifically cited the decision in respect of the Yendi chieftaincy dispute. You see, the judiciary is a part of the conflict resolution mechanisms, that we have adapted for ourselves. But there are times the judiciary alone is unable to give you the needed results that are most desirable. And so when that happens and you continue to have conflict raging, what do? You have to create the avenue for dialogue. So even in the face of the judgments that have been alluded to, my position is that government should replicate what happened in Yendi. Let the two factions come to the negotiating table and talk. For all you know,
who should? I guess the question is, who should lead this dialogue? Should we have Asante Hene again? Do we have what sort of mechanism should be the structure around which they come together?
That committee could be composed of very eminent citizens who are, knowledgeable in conflict resolution. I know my brother, Dr. Bombande, comes from the Bawku area, but you can imagine there are people like him in the system. Put them together, people who are respectable, chiefs, a combination of them. Could help us in this, situation. Young spoke about Peace Council and the efforts they have made over the period. But we must commend them. But I think where we've gotten to, if we had a committee like we had in the case of Yendi in place, it would augment the efforts of the Peace Council.
Okay. Mr. Bombande, what do you say about that in terms of changing the strategy, and what vehicle do you create to lead the process of dialogue that brings the same outcome as we got from Yendi?
Yes. So first of all, it's important to appreciate that it is doable, it is possible, as Honorable Algalga has put it. Now keep in mind that one of the most progressive dialogue processes we ever had, I was head of ONEP and I was the lead mediator with civil society groups in 2001. And we followed it up. So we had 4 consistent days in Damango after a 6 months preparation. Then we followed it up with 2 dialogue processes in Kumasi. We designed the process in such a way that it was engaging. Of course, today I wouldn't mediate precisely because of different circumstances. That now do not put me to have the institution of ONEP as it is that I had at that time behind me. But that does not mean ideas could not be offered, and different people, even including resource, should it be required from outside to be part of such a process. It requires then the design of the process. But even before you get there, you need to nurture that environment in which people see dialogue as a possibility. When you get to a point in which people see dialogue in itself to be not in their interest, they become hostile. That's why even today, people who work for peace are threatened and attacked, because it's like you present an idea that I don't like.
But how do you get that? How do you achieve that?
So the design must be patient, it must be enduring, and it must have the right people with the leverage and the personality to be able to assuage people and cool down tempers. Let me give you one scenario. And I like the way you introduce your program. Keep in mind that you talk about the unprecedented nature from December 2021 going through 2022. One of the indicators for me is that all the time we're engaging in dialogue, it was key stakeholders of the leadership of the main ethnic groups with the smaller minority ethnic groups, including mine, that were able to sit down and talk. So you had the Mampusi, you had the Kusasi, then you had the other groups. From what we see from December 2021, a new scenario or a new factor has been introduced, and that's the role of the Nairi. Keep in mind that throughout, the Nairi has never been part of dialogue because it was not a matter that concerned the Nairi. So you have prominent people like Alaji Sule Yirimia, member of the Council of State. You have people like Honorable Avoka, the late John Ndebogre, very prominent citizens from the area who were able to sit down and talk. Now the design has to take into account that you have a new actor that actually has expropriated the initiative from everybody and has brought it to Nalergu. And as you said, from one region completely in the northeast, that now begins to create disturbance in the upper east. Yeah. All these things must be taken into account.
I see. But very challenging and very complex indeed. But we can't avoid not to tackle this head on. And I guess that's where we're leading. And we'll return to this conversation down the line. And just look at the pictures there. This is Bawku, by the way, a very poor part of the country. But the people have found conflict as a very, very active alternative to the lack of employment and lack of job opportunities there. Maybe that's also part of the problem that Bawku is facing. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. As we know now, there is some relative calm, but tension is pretty still high in Bawku. We'll keep a close eye on this, and hopefully, the eruptions that we've seen in the last few weeks are managed in a way that doesn't lead to further escalation. Enjoy the rest of the evening.